Okay, so today we're going to be reading chapter 29. Just as a recap, we left off where Tom and Huck are keeping an eye on the tavern, trying to see if Injun Joe comes in or out of room number two. And as soon as they know that he's not in there, they're planning to sneak in and search for the treasure. Chapter 29. The first thing Tom heard on Friday morning was a glad piece of news. Judge Thatcher's family had come back to town the night before. Both Injun Joe and the treasure sunk into secondary importance for a moment, and Becky took the chief place of the boy's interest. He saw her, and they had an exhausting good time playing hispy and gully keeper with a crowd of their schoolmates. The day was completed and crowned in a peculiarly satisfactory way. Becky teased her mother to appoint the next day for the long promised and long delayed picnic, and she consented. The child's delight was boundless, and Tom's not more moderate. So basically, Becky's mom has just agreed to let the kids have a picnic, and Becky's going to host like a big party, basically, and all the children are very excited. The invitations were sent out before sunset, and straight away the young folks of the village were thrown into a fever of preparation and pleasurable anticipation. Tom's excitement enabled him to keep awake until a pretty late hour, and he had good hopes of hearing Huck's meow and of having his treasure to astonish Becky and the picnickers with the next day. But he was disappointed. No signal came that night. Morning came eventually, and by 10 or 11 o'clock, a giddy and rollicking company were gathered at Judge Thatcher's, and everything was ready for a start. It was not the custom for elderly people to mar the picnics with their presence. To mar means like to mess up or make a black mark on. So typically, the older adults would let the children go off on their own. The children were considered safe enough under the wings of a few young ladies of 18 and a few young gentlemen of 23 or thereabouts. If you remember, actually, also they did the same thing in Little Women when they went on their picnic and had only a few chaperones, basically. The old steam ferry boat was chartered for the occasion. Presently, the gay throng filed up the main street laden with provision baskets. Sid was sick and had to miss the fun, so Mary remained at home to entertain him. The last thing Mrs. Thatcher said to Becky was, "You'll not get back until late. Perhaps you'd better stay all night with some of the girls that live near the ferry landing, child." "Okay, well then I'll stay with Susie Harper, Mamma." "Very well. And mind and behave yourself and don't be any trouble." Presently, as they tripped along, Tom said to Becky, "Say, I'll tell you what we'll do. Instead of going to Joe Harper's, we'll climb right up the hill and stop at the Widow Douglas. Ooh, she'll have ice cream. She has it most every day, dead loads of it, and she'll be awful glad to have us." "Oh, that'll be fun." Then Becky reflected a moment and said, "But what will Mama say?" Now remember, she just told her mom that she's going to go on a picnic. Then when she comes back, she's going to stay at Susie Harper's house. And Tom is now saying, "Oh, you know what? We should make our own plans and go see the Widow Douglas first." So Tom says, "Well, how's she ever going to know?" The girl turned the idea over in her mind and said reluctantly, "Well, I reckon it's wrong, but shucks. Your mother won't know, and so what's the harm? All she wants is that you'll be safe, and I bet you she'd have said to go there if she'd have thought of it. I know she would." So Tom is trying to convince her to disobey her mother's orders. The Widow Douglas' splendid hospitality was a tempting bait. It and Tom's persuasions presently carried the day, so it was decided to say nothing to anybody about the night's program. Presently it occurred to Tom that maybe Huck might come this very night and give the signal. The thought took a deal of the spirit out of his anticipations. Still, he could not bear to give up the fun at Widow Douglas's. And why should he give it up, he reasoned. The signal did not come the night before, so why should it be any more likely to come tonight? So all of a sudden he thinks, you know what, if I'm going to be out all night and I go to the Widow Douglas's house, what if Tom comes tonight and gives me the signal and I'm not there to go look for the treasure? But he reasons in his mind that since it hasn't come the night before, it's probably not going to come tonight. The sure fun of the evening outweighed the uncertain treasure, and Boy-like as he is, he determined to yield to the stronger inclination and not allow himself to think of the box of money another time that day. 3 miles below town, the ferry boat stopped at the mouth of a woody hollow and tied up. The crowd swarmed ashore, and soon the forest distances and craggy heights echoed far and near with shoutings and laughter. All the different ways of getting hot and tired were gone through with, and by the rovers straggled back to the camp, fortified with responsible appetites. Basically, meaning they were very hungry after their full day of playing. And then the destruction of the good things began. After the feast, there was a refreshing season of rest and chat in the shade of the spreading oaks. By, somebody shouted, "Who's ready for the cave?" Okay, so where they went picnicking, there's a cave nearby that lots of the children would like to go and explore in. Everybody was. Bundles of candles were procured, and straightway there was a general scamper up the hill. The mouth of the cave was up the hillside, an opening shaped like a letter A. Its massive oaken door stood unbarred. Within was a small chamber, chilly as an ice house, and walled by nature with solid limestone that was dewy with a cold sweat. It was romantic and mysterious to stand here in the deep gloom and look out upon the green valley shining in the sun. But the impressiveness of the situation quickly wore off, and the romping began again. The moment a candle was lighted, there was a general rush upon the owner of it. A straggle and a gallant defense followed, but the candle was soon knocked down or blown out, and then there was a glad clamor of laughter and a new chase. But all things have an end. By, the procession went filing down the steep descent of the main avenue. This is in the cave, so there's like a set of steps basically in the cave, and they're climbing down. The flickering rank of lights dimly revealing the lofty walls of rock, almost to their point of junction 60 feet overhead. This main avenue was not more than 8 or 10 feet wide. Every few steps, other lofty and still narrower crevices branched from it on either side. For McDougal's Cave, that was the name of the cave they were exploring, was but a vast labyrinth or a maze of crooked aisles that ran into each other and out again and led nowhere. It was said that one might wander days and nights together through its intricate tangle of rifts and chasms and never find the end of the cave, and that he might go down and still down into the earth, and it was just the same. Labyrinth under labyrinth, and no end to any of them. No man knew the cave. Basically, no one knew no one had like a map of it. No one could quite map it out. That was an impossible thing. Most of the young men knew a portion of it, and it was not customary to venture much beyond this known portion. Tom Sawyer knew as much of the cave as anyone. The procession moved along the main avenue some 3/4 of a mile, and then groups and couples began to slip aside into branch avenues, fly along the dismal corridors, and take each other by surprise at points where the corridors joined again. Basically, the whole group was walking together, and then as they kept on going, some of the groups would start splitting off and then try and sneak around to a different side of the group and scare everyone. Just kids being kids and exploring. Parties were able to elude each other for the space of half an hour without going beyond the known ground. By, one group after another came straggling back to the mouth of the cave, meaning like the opening of the cave where they first started, panting, hilarious, smeared from head to foot with tallow drippings, basically dirty from the cave, daubed with clay, and entirely delighted with the success of the day. Then they were astonished to find that they had been taking no note of time and that night was about at hand. The clanging bell from the town had been calling for half an hour, meaning it was like basically it was later than the clanging bell would ring at dinner time, basically. So at this point, it's almost nightfall. However, this sort of close to the day's adventures was romantic and therefore satisfactory. When the ferry boat with her wild freight pushed into the stream, nobody cared sixpence for the wasted time but the captain of the craft. Basically, they were late getting back to the boat, but nobody cared because they were having so much fun, except for the captain of the boat who was there waiting for them. Huck was already upon his watch when the ferry boat's lights went glinting past the wharf. He heard no noise on board, for the young people were as subdued and still as people usually are who are nearly tired to death. He wondered what boat it was, and why she did not stop at the wharf, and then he dropped her out of his mind and put his attention upon his business. The night was growing cloudy and dark. 10 o'clock came, and the noise of vehicles ceased. Scattered lights began to wink out. All straggling foot passengers disappeared. The village betook itself to its slumber and left the small watcher, which would be Huck, alone with the silence and the ghosts. 11 o'clock came, and the tavern lights were put out. Darkness was everywhere now. Huck waited in what seemed a weary long time, but nothing happened. His faith was weakening. Was there any use? Was there really any use? Why not just give it up and turn in? A noise fell upon his ear. He was all attention in an instant. The alley door closed softly. He sprang to the corner of the brick store. The next moment, two men brushed by him, and one seemed to have something under his arm. It must be that box. So they were going to remove the treasure. But why call Tom now? It would be absurd. The men would just get away with the box and never be found again. No, no, no. He would stick to their wake and follow them. He would trust to the darkness for security from discovery. So, communing with himself, Huck stepped out and glided along behind the men, cat-like with bare feet, allowing them to keep just far enough ahead of him not to be visible. So he's basically somewhat stalking them in the dark. They moved up the river street 3 blocks, then turned to the left up across street. They went straight ahead then until they came to the path that led up Cardiff Hill. This they took. They passed by the old Welshman's house halfway up the hill without hesitating and still climbed upward. Good, thought Huck. They will bury it in the old quarry. But they never stopped at the quarry. They passed on it too, up the summit. They plunged into the narrow path between the tall sumac bushes and were at once hidden in the gloom. Huck closed up and shortened his distance now, for they would never be able to see him. He trotted along a while, then slackened his pace, fearing he was gaining too fast, meaning he was getting too close. He moved on a piece, then he stopped altogether. He listened, but there was no sound. None, save that he seemed to hear the beating of his own heart. The hooting of an owl came over the hill. Ooh, what an ominous sound! But no footsteps. Heavens, everything lost? He was about to spring with winged feet when a man cleared his throat not 4 feet from him. Very close. So he doesn't see Huck, but Huck can't see him either and does not realize that he is that close to another human being. Huck's heart shot into his throat, but he swallowed it again. And then he stood there shaking as if a dozen agues had taken charge of him at once, and so weak that he thought he must surely fall to the ground. I think augs, however you read that here, I think that means like demons or evil spirits. So Huck is freaking out. He has no idea that he is that close to these two men who we would assume to be Engine Joe and his partner. And obviously, we know so far that Huck is a little bit of a scaredy cat, so he's even more nervous than usual. He knew where he was. He was within 5 steps of the stile leading into Widow Douglas's grounds, so they're very close to the Widow Douglas's house. Very well, he thought. Let them bury it there. It won't be hard to find. Now there was a voice, a very low voice, Injun Joe's. Curse her. Maybe she's got company. There's lights, even late as it is. Well, I can't see any. This was a stranger's voice, the stranger of the haunted house. A deadly chill went to Huck's heart. This, then, was the revenge job they were talking about. Okay, so let me pause a second. Remember, back at the haunted house, Engine Joe was telling his partner that there was one more job he had to do, not because it was necessarily going to get him a lot of money, but because purely for revenge. And Huck all of a sudden realizes this is the job. There's something they're going to do to Widow Douglas or her house in order to get revenge. Then he remembered that the widow Douglas had been kind to him more than once. Oh, no, it said his thought was to fly. But then he remembered that the widow Douglas had been kind to him, to Huck, more than once, and maybe these men were going to murder her. He wished he dared venture to warn her, but he knew he didn't dare, for they might come and catch him. He thought all this and more in the moment that elapsed between the stranger's remarks and Injun Joe's next remark, which was, because the bush is in your way. Now, this way. Now you see, don't you? Oh, yes. Well, there is company there, I reckon. Well, better give it up. Give it up and I'm just leaving this country forever? Give it up and maybe never have another chance? I tell you again, as I've told you before, I don't care for her swag. You can have it. He's like, I don't care about stealing her stuff. You can have all that. But her husband was rough on me. Many times he was rough on me. And mainly, he was the justice of the peace that jugged me for a vagrant. And that ain't all. It ain't a millionth part of it. He had me horsewhipped. Horsewhipped in front of the jail like a slave, with all the town looking on. Horsewhipped. Do you understand? He took advantage of me and died. But I'll take it out of her instead. Okay, so pause. Injun Joe is now we see that Injun Joe has a little bit of a history with Widow Douglas's husband. He was the justice of the peace, or the judge, that basically had convicted Injun Joe in an earlier trial years prior. Part of his punishment was to be horsewhipped in front of the jail. Injun Joe's obviously not happy about that, but her Widow Douglas's husband is now dead, so he can't take revenge on the husband. So instead, he's going to take revenge on Widow Douglas. Oh, don't kill her. Don't do that. Kill? Who said anything about killing? This is Injun Joe talking. I would kill him if he was here, but not her. When you want to get revenge on a woman, you don't kill her. Huh. You go for her looks. You slit her nostrils. You notch her ears like a sow, like a cow, basically. So he's not going to kill the Widow Douglas. He just wants to either slit her nostrils, so like take a knife and cut into her nostrils, or cut a little chunk out of her ears, basically. And his partner says, by God, that's. Injun Joe says, keep your opinion to yourself. It'll be safest for you. I'll tie her to the bed. If she bleeds to death, is that my fault? I'm not going to cry if she does. My friend, you'll help me in this thing. For my sake. That's why you're here. I mightn't be able to do it alone. If you flinch, meaning if you even for 1 second think you might not be able to do this with me, I'll kill you. Do you understand that? And if I have to kill you, I'll kill her. And then I reckon nobody'll ever know much about who done this business. Well, if it's got to be done, let's just get at it. The quicker the better. I'm all in a shiver. So you can see that his partner is not 100% on board with this plan, but he either has to help Injun Joe or Injun Joe's going to kill him. So Injun Joe says, do it now? With company there? Look here. I'll get suspicious of you first thing you know. No. We'll wait till all the lights are out. There's no hurry. Huck felt that a silence was going to ensue, a thing still more awful than any amount of murderous talk. So he held his breath and stepped gingerly back. He planted his foot carefully and firmly. After balancing one-legged in a precarious way and almost toppling over, first on one side and then on the other. So he's slowly trying to sneak away from where Injun Joe and his partner are. He took another step back with the same elaboration and the same risks. He's being very careful to be as quiet as possible. Then another and another, and a twig snapped under his foot. His breath stopped and he listened. There was no sound. The stillness was perfect. His gratitude was measureless. Why is he so thankful? Because when he snapped that twig, he thought Injun Joe and his partner would hear him. But it turns out they haven't heard him, or they're just not concerned about the sound. They don't think anyone's there. Now he turned in his tracks between the walls of sumac bushes, turned himself as carefully as if he were a ship, and then stepped quickly but cautiously along. When he finally emerged at the quarry, he felt secure, and so finally he picked up his nimble heels and flew. So he sprinted away. Down the hill he sped till he reached the Welshman's. He banged at the door, and presently the heads of the old man and his two stalwart sons were thrust from windows. "What's the row there? Who's banging? What do you want?" "Let me in. Quick, I'll tell you everything." "Why, who are you?" "Huckleberry Finn. Quick, let me in." Huckleberry Finn, indeed. Well, that ain't a name to open many doors, I judge. But let him in, lads, and let's see what's the trouble. "Please, please don't ever tell that I told you," were Huck's first words when he got in. "Please don't. I'd be killed sure. But the widow's been good friends to me sometimes, and I want to tell. I, I will tell if you'll promise you won't ever say it was me." "By George, he has got something to tell, or he wouldn't act like this so," exclaimed the old man. "Out with it, boy, and nobody here will ever tell, lad." So Huck tells him that about what he just witnessed at Widow Douglas's house and that she's in danger. 3 minutes later, the old man and his sons, well armed with weapons and guns, were up the hill and just entering the sumac path on tiptoe, their weapons in their hands. But Huck accompanied them no further. He hid behind a great boulder and fell to just listening. There was a lagging, an anxious silence, and then all of a sudden there was an explosion of firearms and a cry. Huck waited for no particulars. He sprang away and sped down the hill as fast as his legs could carry him.